Trump's announcement landed like a thunderclap. He'll meet Vladimir Putin in Alaska on August 15th to try to end the war in Ukraine. But here's the kicker: Kyiv wasn't invited. That alone makes this far more than a summit. It turns a diplomatic meeting into a test of alliances, legitimacy, and the rules that have governed Europe since 1945. Welcome back to GeoFrontline. Today we're unpacking everything about this Alaska summit: the politics, the battlefield realities, the back-channel maneuvering, and the worst-case scenarios that keep military planners awake at night. Stay with me. By the end, you'll understand why this meeting could reshape the global order or, if mishandled, accelerate a dangerous unraveling. Let's start with a simple question. Why would Trump want a one-on-one encounter with Putin? And why now? There are several layers. First, the optics. A summit is the ultimate media event. For an American president who prizes deal-making and image, sitting across from Putin is a grand theater of authority. Second, timing. The war in Ukraine has dragged on for years, with huge human cost and political fatigue in the West. Trump has made ending the conflict a centerpiece of his pitch: fast, bold, and decisive. Third, leverage. The U.S. has been ratcheting up pressure, economic, diplomatic, even military posture. A summit is the carrot for Moscow to accept a pause, perhaps in exchange for limited concessions that Trump can brand as victory. Now ask, why is Ukraine furious? Because no peace that affects Ukraine can be legitimate without Ukraine's consent. Imagine negotiating the future of a home while the homeowner is told to wait in the driveway. Zelensky and his cabinet see the exclusion not just as an insult, but as a direct threat to sovereignty. They fear a deal that freezes Russian gains into permanent status, stripping Kyiv of territory and bargaining power. Their fear is rooted in history and law. Territorial changes achieved by force violate principles the West claims to defend. On the ground in Ukraine, the military picture complicates everything. Frontline soldiers and commanders know that a premature ceasefire that locks in current lines could consolidate Russian control over strategic corridors and infrastructure, rail hubs, energy facilities, and defensive depth, without guarantees for demilitarization, withdrawal, and credible monitoring. A ceasefire can be a prelude to long-term occupation. Ukrainian forces would be asked to lay down arms without durable security guarantees. That's not peace. That's a recipe for future war. Europe is watching this unfold with a mix of anger and alarm. Partner capitals from Warsaw to Berlin are worried about being sidelined, both strategically and politically. European governments, which have borne the humanitarian and economic costs of the war and lead sanctions, view inclusion in any negotiation as essential. There's also a practical military reason. The security architecture of the continent is woven through NATO and EU mechanisms. A deal brokered outside those frameworks risks breaking that architecture into pieces. Moscow, by contrast, sees an Alaska summit as a diplomatic prize. Putin's playbook is consistent: create facts on the ground, then seek recognition or accommodation. If the Kremlin secures even tacit acceptance of its territorial gains, it gains more than land. It gains political cover and a reduction in isolation. For Putin, this summit is about normalization. It is about flipping the narrative from aggressor to legitimate negotiating partner. Let's get practical about what could be on the table. Sources inside diplomatic circles say 3 buckets are likely: immediate ceasefire mechanisms, withdrawal or repositioning of certain forces, and a package of sanctions relief or phased easing tied to compliance. Another bone of contention is Crimea. For Moscow, Crimea is a strategic and symbolic prize. For Kyiv and its allies, it's a red line. Any proposal that treats Crimea as negotiable will provoke an uproar. Then there are finance and sanctions. The U.S. could offer partial sanction relief for specific sectors: energy, shipping corridors, or access to certain financial services, if Moscow agrees to verifiable steps. That's where things get very tricky. Sanctions are leveraging tools used to change behavior. Rolling them back without concrete, verified concessions would undermine the very principle of accountability that underpins the sanctions regime. Let's talk leverage and coercion. Trump's administration believes in transactional pressure. Credible threat plus a quick offer equals compliance. That explains the ultimatum tone: agree or face further penalties. But coercion has limits. Countries and leaders respond to their internal constraints. For Putin, domestic politics, security concerns, and military logic shape his options. He will weigh whether accepting a deal hurts his hold on power or military pride. If a deal appears to weaken him domestically, he might double down. Meanwhile, the risk of blowback is real. If the summit produces a deal that appears to sell Ukraine short, we could see immediate political consequences in Washington, Congress pushing for sanctions blocks, aid packages, and measures to counter any rollback of Ukrainian sovereignty. NATO unity could erode if members believe core values are being traded for a quick headline. And if the public perceives a betrayal of a partner, U.S. credibility becomes a casualty as grave as any territorial loss. Another dimension to weigh: the information battlefield. Expect a flood of propaganda and disinformation from multiple sources around the summit. Moscow will spin any concession as validation. Kremlin-friendly outlets will trumpet Russian triumph. Beijing, watching closely, may interpret Western fissures as opportunity. Iran and others may test the waters in their regions. The summit's narrative battle will be fought across social media, state TV, and diplomatic briefings. Winning the narrative is as important as the deal terms themselves. So what are the plausible scenarios, and what should we be watching for? Scenario 1. An inclusive summit. Trump insists on engaging Putin, but agrees to include Ukraine or a parallel European-Ukrainian track. This would preserve political legitimacy and could produce a durable roadmap, incremental, verifiable, and tied to international guarantees. That's the best-case path. Scenario 2. A face-to-face that produces a limited ceasefire without Ukrainian consent. This leads to a shaky truce, domestic political fallout, and potential splintering of NATO unity. Scenario 3. No deal. High rhetoric, increased sanctions, and escalation on the battlefield as each side repositions. Scenario 4. A misstep that leads to intense escalation, cyber attacks, or proxy confrontations elsewhere. Each has cascading consequences globally. Let's explore the human stakes. In Ukraine's towns and cities, people yearn for peace, but not at the price of land or dignity. Refugees and displaced families have lost everything. For them, the danger is that quick deals ignore justice and accountability for war crimes, reconstruction needs, and the social fabric required to rebuild. Peace is not just cessation of hostilities. It includes justice, reconstruction, and economic aid sufficient to restore livelihoods. Any agreement that lacks those pillars risks sowing seeds for future conflict. Another angle is the role of third parties and the institutions that must verify any agreement. Who monitors withdrawals? Who enforces demilitarized zones? The UN has mechanisms, but their effectiveness depends on political will. NATO could provide monitoring, but that requires political consensus. The EU can assist reconstruction, but funding hinges on political terms. Without credible monitors and enforcement mechanisms, compliance is fragile. Now, let's zoom out to the global strategic implications. If the US brokered a deal that marginalizes Ukraine, it risks sending the message that America's leadership is transactional and its commitments conditional. That undermines alliances in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, where US partners value predictable commitments. China carefully watches these dynamics. If Beijing sees fractures in Western unity, it may accelerate its own strategic moves. Taiwan posturing, maritime coercion, or deeper energy security relationships with Moscow. It's also crucial to look at domestic politics. For Trump, a summit with Putin offers a potential personal and political triumph. The promise of peace resonates with voters tired of frozen conflicts. But if the deal backfires, he faces fierce opposition in Congress and among key constituencies. For Putin, public domestic optics matter immensely. Appearing to negotiate from weakness is risky. For Zelensky and Ukraine, survival, both military and political, depends on maintaining international support. Expect a frenzy of diplomatic activity in the days before the summit. Backchannels, shuttle diplomacy, and frantic phone calls. European leaders will press for inclusion, or at least for guarantees that Ukraine's voice will be heard. Military planners will quietly update contingency plans. Intelligence services will vet possible deception or bad faith offers. This is not theater. It's a pressure cooker of real power politics. What should viewers watch for during the summit? First, the guest list, who is seated where, and who is in the room. Second, the text of any joint statement. Its language matters. Does it commit to ceasefires, monitoring, and withdrawal? Does it address Crimea? Third, timing. Are there phased steps or vague promises? Fourth, guarantors. Who signs on to enforce terms? Fifth, follow-through. How quickly does implementation begin, and who verifies it? Let's consider deterrence and deterrent credibility. If the U.S. presses for a deal and then fails to defend the agreed-upon terms, adversaries learn that pressure can force concessions with little penalty. That would be dangerous. Conversely, if the U.S. refuses to relax pressure until verifiable steps are taken and maintains unity with allies, the summit could be a mechanism for durable de-escalation. There are also financial levers. Sanctions relief can be powerful bait, but it must be calibrated. Selective, reversible, and verifiable adjustments tied to concrete steps, like withdrawal or prisoner exchanges, can incentivize compliance. Blanket rollback risks enabling the very behavior sanctions are meant to punish. Before we wrap up, let's ask the key normative question. Can peace be just without participation by those most affected? The short answer is no. A durable peace requires agency, consent, and the participation of the people living on the contested land. Excluding Ukraine reduces the legitimacy of any agreement and increases the friction in implementation. So what can be done to improve the odds of a constructive outcome? First, insist on Ukraine's inclusion, either directly in the core talks or through a guaranteed parallel track with equal weight. Second, embed robust verification mechanisms with impartial guarantors. Third, tie sanctions relief to clearly defined, irreversible steps. Fourth, ensure a reconstruction package led by Europe and backed by the U.S. to address post-conflict recovery and security guarantees. Fifth, keep an eye on deterrence. Maintain credible military and economic pressure until obligations are met. The Alaska Summit is a rare diplomatic opening. It could deliver an overdue pause in bloodshed if handled with care, openness, and multilateral buy-in. Or it could create a brittle illusion of peace that leaves Ukraine weaker and the world order fragmented. The difference will be whether leaders choose inclusion and enforcement or quick headlines and risky shortcuts. Keep watching. The days around August 15th will be decisive. Tell me what you think. Should Ukraine accept parallel talks or refuse any summit that excludes it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if you want daily updates on this story, and subscribe to GeoFrontline for the kind of analysis you won't get in a headline.